Good afternoon. Welcome. In this lecture, this is going to be chapter 2, part 2. We're going to look at melody and harmony. Melody. Melody is probably one of the most fundamental aspects that we gravitate towards when we listen to a piece of music. Okay, melody is the tune, it's the part that we listen to. Lots of times it will be the part that we sing. And within a melody, it's a series of notes that are put together that has a complete phrase. Okay, it consists of pitches combined with durations. Okay, so the durations of the pitches are going to be more associated with rhythm. The pitches are how high or low a sound will be. Okay, and these pitches are based on vibrations of sound. Okay, keep in mind sound moves in waves, and each of these pitches has a very distinct frequency. Now, in musical terms, we identify these pitches by letter names, and they use letters of the alphabet going from A through G. Now, we have a quote here from Franz Joseph Haydn, and the quote is, "It is the melody which is the charm of music, and it is that which is most difficult to produce." The octave. Now, the octave is probably the most common interval for most musical cultures, and it's a very important interval that we base our musical tuning system off of. Okay, it's basically the octave is a duplication of a pitch at a higher level. So if you look at the keyboard here, we have the note C. Okay, and then the note C will reappear again, basically what we call an octave higher. Okay. Now keep in mind, if you look at a piano keyboard, you're going to see 88 notes, but they're not 88 different notes. They're in groups of 12, and they're organized that way. So when you understand that, the piano becomes a little bit more easier to understand. Okay. So obviously, an octave is basically 12 pitches or 12 half steps above the lower pitch. Okay, and it's based on an interval. Okay, an interval is the distance between two pitches or two notes. Okay, so one note is just one note. If you have two notes, it's what's called an interval, and then if we have three or more notes, it's going to be what we call a chord. Notating a melody. Now, when we write music on what we call a 5-line staff, and we can see this here. Okay, and when we look at a staff, the notes towards the lower part of the staff are going to be lower in the musical scale or musical system, and then when we go up, the pitches are going to be higher as we go up. Okay, that's how it works. And we also add these two signs here. We see this sign, which is what we call a treble clef, and this sign, which is like a backward C, that's what's called a bass clef. And these clefs indicate the pitches that we will write on with specific 5-line staff. Okay, so the treble clef has higher pitches. Okay, with this note will be E, G, B, D, and then F. Let's listen to them. Okay. The bass clef is much lower than the treble clef. So these notes are going to be sounding a lot lower. Okay. And these notes are going to be of G, B, D, F, and A. Let's listen to those notes. The grand staff. Now, when you look at a piece of music or piece of piano music, what you'll see lots of times is two set staffs. Okay, and they're combined with a bracket, and we have a bass clef and treble clef. And this type of grand staff is best associated with keyboard music, with music of the piano, harpsichord, and so forth. And one thing I tell people is the first thing, obviously, the bass clef is going to have a lot lower notes. The treble clef is going to have higher notes. Okay, And then we look here, we see this big space in between. And yes, there's a big space in between, which for us, when we look at it visually, we would think that there's a lot of notes in there, but there's not. There's only really three notes. There's a B, middle C, which is a very important note for the keyboard, okay, helps us orient everything, and then D, okay. For our purposes, though, the notes on the bass clef are going to sound lower. The notes on the treble clef are going to sound higher. Okay. So even if you don't read music or you're not a musician, you can still look at this and have some understanding of what's going on with the sounds. Let's listen to the notes of the grand staff. So that's one of the notes that's presented here. One thing I like to remind people of, yes, this is a lot of the majority of the notes that we will hear. However, it's not comprehensive. There are many notes below this low G that we can still hear and we would hear in music. And there's many notes above this F that we would hear as well. A scale. Now, a scale, basically, the technical definition is a selection of pitches within an octave. Now, within these pitches, we're going to have a hierarchy as well. So we normally have two types of scales that we'll encounter through this course. We have a major scale and we have a minor scale. And the major scale is going to sound, happier, more brighter. Okay, the minor scale is going to sound darker, maybe more serious. Okay, and there are others. They're the main two scales, major and minor. But there are a lot of other scales out there as well. There's a pentatonic scale that's used a lot in folk music. There's a scale called the whole tone scale. And there's other ones, but they're the ones that we're going to encounter in this course. And when you change the scale in a piece of music that you're using, you're going to change the composition, how the entire composition sounds, because the scale is one of the essential building blocks that you're basing a piece on. So if you're writing a piece using a major scale, good chance it's going to sound very, very bright, happy, kind of joyful. If you write a piece using a minor scale, well, guess what? It's going to be more darker, maybe more intense, depending on, because that scale is going to influence a lot of the other components to the piece of music that you write. The major scale. Now, as I mentioned before, the major scale, it's going to have a sense of joyfulness, confidence. Lots of times people say it's going to sound happy. And basically, a major scale is going to be a group of 7 notes, just like a minor scale. It's going to be a group of 7 notes, but the scale degrees between the 3rd and 4th degrees are going to have a half step. And then the 6th and 7th degree, it's going to have a half step between them. And that's important because those half steps really, really define kind of the essence of a major scale, or where the half steps, I'm going to put it to you a different way. Where the half steps lie in your scales for major and minor are very important because that's the defining factor. Okay. Now, for our course, we don't need to know what a whole step is and what a half step is. But if you were to look at a keyboard, and if you look at E and F, they're the white notes, you'd see that they're adjacent to each other and they're half step apart. Just like if we were to look at B and C, well, those 2 notes on the piano are again 2 white notes that are adjacent to each other. Okay, that means where the half steps meet. Let's go listen to what a major scale sounds like. Continuing, we'll talk about the minor scale. And the minor scale is a much darker scale than the major scale, okay? And, sometimes it's associated with anxiety, sorrow, despair. And we'll see here, it's 7 notes. We have from C to C again, eighth note is if you count a C. And if you see where the W and the H's are, well, the half steps for the minor scale have moved between the second and third pitches and the fifth and sixth pitches, okay? And when we, again, as I said before, when we move those half steps, we're going to change the nature of the scale. In addition, we're also going to see a couple of these backwards B's. They're called flat signs, okay? So here we have an E flat, we have an A flat, and a B flat. And when we add a flat to a pitch, we're going to lower that pitch 1/2 step. Thus, we're changing the natures of the scale again. Let's listen to this minor scale. The chromatic scale. So chrome or chromatic comes from the Greek word chroma, which means color, okay? And this scale basically divides the octave into 12 equal parts. So it's going to have 12 steps to it, okay? And the chromatic scale is going to use it's going to go up every single half step. So if we went up every single note of that piano keyboard, you'd be going up a chromatic scale. Let's listen to this chromatic scale to hear what it sounds like. Melodies. So, as I said before, when we change the nature of the scale in our works, we're going to change the nature of the actual work and the texture and the quality of the sound of it. So on this slide, we have 3 different examples of melodies, one using the major scale, one using the minor scale, one using the chromatic scale. So let's listen to each of these and then listen for the differences or the similarities. So the first one is going to be a major scale. It's going to be more brighter. Let's listen. The next is going to be a minor scale, so it may have more of a darker sonority to it. And then finally, we had that chromatic scale. Let's listen to that. Tonality. Tonality, it's the organization of music around a central pitch or a central note, okay? If we had a piece in the key of C major, well, we'd be using the C major scale, okay? And then C would be the most important note of that scale. And that central note is called the tonic note, okay? Melodies gravitate around the tonic, okay? They would usually start on the tonic note, and they definitely would want to end on that tonic note, okay? The tonic note is, the first or the last pitch of the scale. An example, row, row, row your boat. That's a great example. So if we did row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, well, when I'm singing row, 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 that's the tonic note of that scale, okay? Row, row, row your boat is using a major scale. And when we end row, row, row your boat, we say, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. And when we have the word dream, that comes back to that tonic note. Now, we have 2 examples here. We have one example that's using a scale and using a scale that has a tonal center. And then we have another example that doesn't, okay? So the one that doesn't have a tonal scale might sound a little more distant, a little harsh to us. So I'm going to play you both examples, and I want you guys to sit back and listen and see which of these examples has its tonal center and which of them may not. So the first example is going to sound like this. The second example is going to sound like this. Now, if you're listening to these two examples, the tonal example, or the example of a music that's written within a key, is going to be example B. It's Haydn's Surprise Symphony. Example A is a piece by Schoenberg, and that was one of the first pieces that was written outside or not using tonal music. Key. So a key is associated with the tonality of a piece of music, okay? So if we were to say a piece is in C major, well, C is the tonic note, and C is going to be the main note that this piece is written, and that's what we're going to gravitate towards, okay? You know, if we were in a minor key, it would operate the same way. If we said a work was in the key of A minor, well, they would gravitate towards the A. Now, in music, obviously, we start off in one key and we can move to different keys. That adds to the dynamic element of what music is, okay? So we have this term called modulation. Modulation means we're going to start in one key and we're going to move away from that key and go to a different key, okay? And sometimes it's brief, we'll go there and then we'll come back. Sometimes we'll go to a different key and we'll stay there, or maybe even other times we'll go to even a more distant key. So in the example here, we have Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and this example is going to show music moving from one key to another. So let's listen and try and see if you can hear this music modulating. Other terms that we're going to use to describe a melody. So there's a couple musical terms that we want to be aware of, okay? The first is articulation. And articulation is how the notes are connected to time, okay? And sometimes you can have very short notes, bum, 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 and those short notes are very detached, and it's what we call staccato, okay? And the opposite of staccato is having all those notes connected together. Da, 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 which is a term called legato. Okay. Let's listen to these two terms. So this is an example of notes that are played detached or staccato. Again, as you can hear, all the notes are separated. The opposite is the legato. And you're going to hear in this example, all the notes are very, very connected together. Okay, let's listen. Two other terms that we want to be familiar with are conjunct motion and disjunct. Okay. Conjunct motion means that melodies are going to move together in a stepwise motion. They're going to be either going up Da 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 da, stepwise. Okay. Row, row, row your boat is an example of that. Row, row, row your boat. Disjunct means the notes are going to move, but they're going to skip pieces. Da 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 da. I mean that right there is disjunct because I'm jumping from a one note into a fifth higher. So let's listen to these two examples and listen. In the first example is conjunct motion, and try and listen for the melody moving stepwise. Okay. In the next example, it's going to be disjunct. So let's listen to this melody, but listen for the melody jumping by skipping over several notes. This concludes Chapter 2, Part 2, talking about melody. Please stay tuned next time for Chapter 2, Part 3, where we'll finish the chapter talking about harmony.